Everybody, Mike and Andy here, Brea World headquarters, Vox World headquarters, I should say, in Brea, California. We are so glad that you are tuning in today. A couple of things real quick. We're recording this on, February 27th?
Yep.
To be released February 27th.
Oh, yeah.
So look at that, same day turnaround. There was much sickness in the Erre household last week, much barfing, and so to record here could have been a difficult challenge in the background. So
right, I am at heavy risk sitting in this room.
No, you're.
Right now.
I think you're okay. I think you're okay. Yeah, we slaughtered lambs at twilight. And we think the angel of death has passed over. So we're not sure.
Oh, that explains the blood on the top of the door.
Yeah, exactly. So a couple of things. First of all, we have a live show coming up March 9th and downtown Fullerton, a Monkey Business Cafe. Mm-hmm. And so we're super excited about that. That show has sold out in a couple of days. So we're thrilled that you all want to be a part of it.
Yeah.
And we're very grateful. We have 97 Patreon supporters who donate to keep things like this free. And so it is totally, completely free and free Coors Light for those of you over 21.
Yep.
And we have a 7 Coors Light limit because we figure that's equivalent to 2 real beers. So you're more than welcome to come. Will we stream that as well?
Yeah, we'll throw it up on Facebook Live.
We'll throw it up on Facebook, he says.
Yep.
But not last week because it would have been literally thrown up on Facebook. So
that's true.
So today, and by the way, just so you know, as always, we have 2 podcasts. We have a little church, and we have we podcast kind of the teachings and the stories out of that. We finished up on the subject of hell. I'm actually next week going to do a podcast just kind of summarizing this massive discussion we've had on judgment. Mm-hmm. And because we have a much larger podcast audience than we do a church podcast audience, and so we're going to kind of go over some of that stuff again. But as always, you can find us either at voxoc.com or voxpodcast.com.
That's right.
And I know I always screw them up. And go ahead.
I was just going to say, and even just a special thank you to a few folks that have been saying hi to us at Vox Community that have come in through the podcast and have found Vox Community through the podcast that way. That's been a really cool experience for us after service for all you guys to come up to us and say that you've been listening.
So there's this little crew in LA that we want to say hi to. That they at least one crew in LA. They about 10 of them sit and listen to these, and holy cow, you guys got to get out more. But we're grateful that until you do, you're tuning into this. Yeah. So thank you. But yeah, I mean, that's so fun. We are so blessed beyond imagining to be a part of your life. So, this episode is going to carry an earmuff warning, because we're going to talk about porn. And, the occasion for that is a conversation I got into at Biola. But also we get tons of questions about it. And in one sense, if you hear that topic and your defenses go up, or you immediately think, well, this doesn't apply to me, I hope you figured out by now, if you've been a regular listener, that we don't always approach things kind of the straightforward way. So this is not going to be a please don't look at porn talk. This is going to be something a bit different and deeper than that. And for those of you that are in the midst of the struggle, hopefully a bit of my story could provide some hope. And for those of you that aren't in the midst of the struggle, guaranteed you know somebody who is, or dating somebody who is, or married to somebody who is, or parenting somebody who is. But we also live in a culture where, I heard the analogy recently, it's kind of like secondhand smoke. It's like whether or not you are smoking, if people around you are smoking, you're still affected. Well, I think that the same is true in kind of the pornified culture in which we live. Even if you're not indulging, but people around you are, you're still affected. Yeah, there's still something happening that needs to be discussed.
The outrageous size of the industry on a global spectrum. Like in
Right.
the same way the tobacco industry has grown into something and drastically affects tons of things. I mean, we're all
Right.
affected by it. That's bottom line.
So, so we want to spend some time talking through this topic, and we want to do it honestly, of course. So if you have, I mean, I think most junior hires are already aware of this, if not having dabbled in it themselves. But I just want to talk a bit because this is my struggle, one of many, but this is one that is, I wish, it would just disappear. I was exposed very early on by a family member who was kind-hearted in trying to help me through puberty. I was 11, and this family member gave me a magazine. And for those of you millennials, magazines they're printed on paper, and they have sort of glossy images in them, and you'll see them in museums someday. And this one contained pictures of women that were not appropriately dressed at all, and the line was, "This is what women are like," and so that wasn't thrown away afterwards. That was kept. I knew where it was kept, and I had access, not at all like today's access, but had access, for as long as I was growing up at home, and I soon became aware that this was forming and shaping my views on things. But it wasn't until much later that I realized the damage, that it was doing. I thought it was sort of harmless, and no one was getting hurt, and those sorts of things. And so, even when I took over a church in the area, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, the first thing I told the elder board, the leaders of the church, was, listen, that we were doing prayer requests. And sometimes, when you're sharing things to pray for, it's kind of like not really honest. It's sort of like, yeah, my son's girlfriend has an issue, or, I'm asking the boss for a raise or something. You're like, okay, those are, yeah, of course.
I need a little more sleep.
Yes. But I said, please pray for me on Mondays. Because if I'm going to look at porn, and if I'm going to overeat, it's going to be on Mondays. Because as we've talked about on the podcast, Monday's the best day to sin if you're in vocational ministry, right? Because you can kind of work it off by the next weekend. So, and it's a reward for how intense Sunday was. So that didn't go over great. People don't mind when you have a struggle in the past. They're very, very wary if you're still struggling. So I talk about this as one who has achieved peaks and valleys, deep victories and staggering setbacks. And I currently do not have, like, for instance, Safari on my phone, and I have software on my computer, and it's not because I'm some raging, porn addict, but it's because I could be. It wouldn't take much to push me in that direction. So I'm coming at this not just as somebody who is going to offer some thoughts, but as somebody who's kind of seen the bottom a bit and seen the top, and has also realized, now my 13-year-old and I ask each other about how our eyes were, today. My 11-year-old sweet little girl, is beginning to ask questions about how, why at like football games are the women in very little clothing and the men in clothed from head to toe.
Yeah.
Why is there that double standard everywhere? She's beginning to wake up to that. So for us, this is a very live, very tender topic. And whenever I think about these things or want to talk about them, I never want to just talk about them in isolation from other things, because it's very easy to just be moralistic on this topic and say, porn is bad. Stop doing it. Here's how.
Yeah.
And while all of those statements are true, they don't really capture the nuances of the struggle. So I always want to step back and put the struggle in the bigger picture of sexuality, because it's not just isolated, of course not. And so, as we've talked about before, when we talk about sexuality, the Bible begins, the first commandment of the Bible is after God made human beings in his image, male and female, he created them. He said, be fruitful and multiply. And so the rabbis just would have a field day with the fact that of the 613 commandments of the Torah, the first one given was the command to have sex.
Amen.
And of all of the ways an infinitely creative God could have designed reproduction, right? He could have had storks deliver babies. He could have had us garden, a la the Matrix. I mean, we could have done anything. He created it to be incredibly fun. And not only that, not only is it blessed as an act of procreation, but contrary to some of our other brothers and sisters in the faith, it's blessed as an act of recreation. And you see that in a collection of love poems called the Song of Songs. And these are patterned after Egyptian love and wedding songs. These would be sung or recited at Jewish weddings. They were graphic. They were, you take the first sentence of the book is the woman saying, let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is more delightful than wine. And the word love is the word dode, which refers to physical intimacy. So it's better than getting drunk is the kind of the idea. And this is very common. They're euphemisms, but they would have been readily understood by the Jewish audiences even today. And of course, there's an argument to be made that this sort of intimacy is the kind of intimacy God desires with his people. And so marriage, the marital relationship, has been used all over the Bible as a way to describe God's desired intimacy with his people. So many think that's what the Song of Songs is, and it certainly could be that, but minimally, it's at the very least sort of celebrating the goodness, the beauty, the wholeness, the holiness of sexuality. That the Bible begins by saying that we were sexual before we were sinful, that our sexuality isn't part of our sinfulness. It's not part of the sin nature. It's an essential and fundamental part of being human.
Right.
And it was part of the world that God declared to be very good. So desire is good, and attraction is good, and romance is good, and orgasm is good, and all of the trappings of romance and love and intimacy, all of that was declared to be very good. And the church doesn't ever, unless it's a trite way, like the let's married couples make love 7 days in a row and let's make a big deal about it challenge. How lame is that?
Wait, I haven't been to a church that's offered that yet.
Oh yes, there are some attention grabbers that have done this, and it's just ridiculous. It's just silly, and that's fine. But
if I was going to offer a contest.
No.
From the podcast,
Oh,
it would
boy.
actually be for my graphic designers out there.
Oh, boy.
If you were to do a romance book cover for Song of Solomon's, that would just be epic.
Well, and you have to include, you go read the book.
Yeah.
If you're sitting there thinking, is this referring to what I think it's referring to? Yes.
Yes.
In fact, English doesn't actually capture sort of the graphic nature of some of the illustrations. It's really, really funny. So I would encourage you, if you've never read it. And it's celebrating covenantal love. It's not just a throwaway to any expression of human sexuality. It's Godward sexuality, of course. But I think a lot of people are still surprised when because what they hear from the church is all the thou shalt nots. And what the Bible doesn't. There's no thou shalt not before thou shalt,
right? And
that it was a good and creative gift. And so for so many of us, sexuality and our struggles with it's viewed as a curse. It's a thorn. It's a struggle. It's a wrestling. It's loneliness. It's addiction. It's shame. It's guilt. Oh, and it just was never intended to be that.
Mm-hmm.
And to kind of be recaptured by God's desire for us to be fully human. And to be fully human means to be fully sexual. That sexuality and spirituality are the same thing. I mean, it's not, these aren't carnal desires.
Right.
These are God-given, this is God-originated stuff.
Mm-hmm. In addition to like the first command in that way, would you say that there's probably far more verses written about pro-sexuality versus out there about sexual immorality? Like,
that's a great question, because there are some parts of the Levitical law where it's literally, do not have sex with animals. Do not have sex with your brother-in-law.
Yes.
Do not have sex with your sister-in-law. Do not have sex with your parents. Do not have sex with your parents-in-law. I mean, it's like, so I don't know in the ratio,
right?
But I would say in the imagery for sure. I don't know about the actual word counts, but the imagery, absolutely, the soaring imagery of Scripture's depiction of the first man, the first woman, their first encounter, being naked and unashamed, the Song of Songs, portions of marriage and its descriptions in the New Testament. I mean, absolutely. And one of the interesting parts about the creation narrative is that human beings were created, it says we're created from the dust, from the dirt, and that God breathed his breath into lumps of clay, literally. And so the picture we get is that human beings are this unique physical spiritual hybrid, the unique spiritual physical union that's different than the just physical stuff created before humans. So we're different than animals and different than fish and plants. They don't have the soulish, sense of image bearing that human beings seem to have. But on the other side, we read about these angelic beings who are spiritual in nature, but they don't have physical bodies. Now, they can evidently manifest physical bodies, because you have all these telephonies in the Old Testament where angels sort of appear and whatever. But human beings occupy this interesting spot where we're not animals and we're not angels. And those represent, the animal part and the angel part represent two extremes on the whole sexual conversation. To just look at human beings as animals is to say we are simply the sum of our desires. We're enslaved to them. There's nothing we can do about them. Your desires literally are your destiny. And so if there's no soul to us, if there's no mastery of desire available to us, then literally we serve at the whim of our desires, just like animals do, right? They're in heat, we're in heat. And that really undergirds a lot of sexual ethics today, right? Give the kids condoms because they're just going to do it. The hookup culture. It's even in the descriptions and the words that are used, it's just this joining, unjoining thing. It has no consequence to it. There's nothing significant about it. It's just this thing we do. And yet the Scripture insists that transformation is possible, that your desires aren't your destiny, that part of the following of Jesus is to deny yourself and take up your cross and follow him. And we'll talk about that later. But that we're not just prisoners of desire, but at the same time, the angelic mistake, and a lot of churches make this one, is the pretending that we don't have any desires. It's like, good Christian people would never struggle with pornography, would never struggle with adultery, would never struggle with being dissatisfied with your spouse, right? Would never have questions about using sexual toys or masturbating or whatever. And that's just as equally wrong, right? So we are, because we're not angels, we have very live, real, deep desires. And because we're not animals, there's something attached to those desires that's bigger than them, that helps put them in perspective, that helps and connects to them, so that what we do with our bodies affects our deeper selves too.
Right.
So there's a lot in Genesis 1, 2, and 3 just about the goodness of sexuality and the fact that human beings kind of sit in this hybrid situation where we have real desires and yet we're not just a slave to them. So trying to hold both of those in tension is really, really difficult. So that's sort of the first move of any biblical theology of sexuality is it's celebrating its goodness and its beauty and its wholeness. The second move is to celebrate its power. And immediately you get that in Genesis 2, where the man and the woman meet. The man has this kind of first poem in the Bible. This woman is flesh of my flesh; she's bone of my bone. The scripture says that they are naked and unashamed, and for this reason a man will leave his household and a woman will leave her household, and they will become one flesh. And the one flesh idea isn't just that they are physically joined, but that their physical joining is symbolic of a much deeper joining, which is the joining of kinship. That the man was no longer defined necessarily by his kinship group, and the woman was no longer defined by her kinship group. They were forming a new kinship group. Mm-hmm. And there was a soulishness to it. That they were united so that they were still two, but you could speak of them as one. Mm-hmm. So the scriptures speak of the power of sexuality, and we see the carnage of that all over the place, right? The hookup culture has its consequences. Mm-hmm. Porn addiction has its consequences, right? I mean, we see the carnage and we feel the carnage, and yet, we still are under sort of tempted anyway to sit under the delusion that none of this is a really big deal. Mm-hmm. And so, anything that is powerful has boundaries, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, if you're electricity, you don't do anything with electricity because it's powerful. It also can be used to hurt. Yeah. And so the sexual ethic of the scriptures is always bound by the power for good or for harm that sexuality can do. Hmm. So you have that. Now, when it comes to the comments on lust, let's say, the Bible distinguishes between normal, healthy sexual desire and lust. And normal, healthy sexual desire is part of God's creation, and that's part of God's good world. And it's, even as I talk to my son, it's not in any way, shape, or form a bad thing to be curious and a bad thing to notice somebody and go, oh my goodness, and you feel that spark and that mm-hmm. flutter and that whatever. But when Jesus uses the word lust, he talks about, and he's using it just from the male perspective. But obviously this goes both ways. And this is not a heterosexual, homosexual thing. I mean, this is like just the nature of lust regardless of direction. That he uses the image, he says, if you look upon another in order to lust. So it's not just that you're looking upon somebody, but it's that you're doing that in order to lust. And the word lust he uses is interesting because it talks about in the mind. And that lust exists in the mind. And then he says this very famous thing. He says, if you've looked after a woman in order to lust after her, it's as if you've committed adultery with her already. Mm-hmm. Now, he did that previously with anger and murder. If you've held someone in anger and contempt, it's like you've murdered them. What he's getting at is that the Pharisees, for all of their boasting about how righteous they were, reduced their obedience to merely external conformity. Mm-hmm. The heart motivations didn't matter to them. So they could walk around and say, well, yeah, I've never committed adultery, mm-hmm. or I've never murdered anybody. I must be fulfilling the commands. Right. And Jesus goes, no. The righteousness, the thing that God's after is actually the transformation of the human heart. Mm-hmm. And so adultery just doesn't happen in a vacuum. It starts with lust. And murder doesn't happen in a vacuum. It starts with anger. Mm-hmm. And so Jesus is doing this very profound thing when he begins to talk about desire. But the desire he's talking about is different than just normal sexual desire, right? Mm-hmm. It's like temptation. Temptation itself is never sin. Right. Jesus was tempted in every way. Right. However, yielding to temptation, to something is wrong, obviously is overstepping a boundary. Right. Makes sense?
Yeah. And then at Biola, when you talked about it, you talked about that Jesus's language when referring to lust also had to do with coveting.
Yeah. So he said, go ahead.
Because it's like, it seems that, what Jesus did consistently with what you just said was point the Pharisees back to the Torah and the original 10 Commandments against those very indictments, because it's kind of like, well, the 10 Commandments don't layer this argument for adultery, but it's like, yeah, but one of those commandments is to not covet.
Well, they
So
no.
Or
They do have a commandment against adultery.
Okay.
They don't have a commandment against lust.
Right.
So what Jesus does is he combines the only command of the 10 that deals with the internal heart of the person, which is do not covet your neighbor's possessions.
Yeah.
Combines it with the command do not commit adultery to get the idea that you should not look upon somebody lustfully.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Yep.
So yes, Jesus is talking very, very specifically about a kind of looking, and I think that's always important to say. And so, for a lot of people, porn isn't purposely chosen. You happen upon it. Someone shows you,
right.
And that first initial, hit of it sometimes is disgust, sometimes it's shame, sometimes it's horror. And then something, kind of begins to happen, something it stirs up something else. And when you get to the scripture's teaching on the prison of where lust sort of creates in us, there's this incredibly rich and sort of terrifying imagery that Paul uses in the book of Ephesians to talk a bit about what it means to have a numbness or hardness of heart. And anybody who's been an addict, and it doesn't matter to what, knows about that numbing. And so I want to talk a little bit about, okay, so let's keep going down the line. Sexuality is powerful. So there are boundaries around it. One of those boundaries has to do with the intentions of our heart and the thoughts and obsessings of our minds. And what happens when those are yielded to time and time again, and stirred up by these pixelated images that can be found now at the click of a button, as opposed to these old things called magazines and whatever. So Paul has this incredible, it just scares me because I've tasted this. He says, "So I tell you this, and I insist on it in the Lord." He's talking to Christians. He says that you must no longer live as those outside of Jesus do, in the futility of their thinking. And then he describes them. He says they are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardness of their hearts. He says the hardening of their hearts. So that phrase he begins to unpack. How does a heart get hardened? He says, having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality so as to indulge in every kind of impurity, and they are full of greed. Now, again, man, Bible words. And if you're somebody, that's like outside this whole thing, you're like, oh boy, here we go. Here's when do I get my purity ring? And, no, that's not what we're doing there. But there's a series, there's a waterfall of images that Paul uses here that in Greek have a lot more punch than just this religious sounding sort of list I just read in English. So the first thing he says about hardening of heart, he says, having lost all sensitivity. And the idea, the word that he uses there, apalegio, I think is how you would say it in Greek.
Yes.
It means it's the condition of being void or past feeling. Okay, so it's having lost the ability to feel things like we used to.
Yeah.
Right? And we know exactly what this is like, right? So your first entrance into that whole kind of illicit world could be fairly innocent. It could be a swimsuit edition. It could be Maxim. It could be something.
Yeah.
But after a while, you need a bit more to kind of get stirred up in the same way. And as that happens, you begin to lose sensitivity. Now that we would say you grow numb to it. So it's kind of, you lose the ability to enjoy the thing. So for instance, alcoholics, from what I understand, they don't enjoy drinking. They're using drinking to get drunk.
Yeah.
They're using alcohol. They're not enjoying alcohol. Gluttons, and I have no experience with this, but I hear that we don't enjoy food. We use food. And so very often, and this is so lame, but very often, if I'm going to town on some ice cream, I'm not enjoying the current bowl. I'm thinking about how great the second bowl will be. And so there's this sense that as opposed to my foodie friends, who will take 5 bites of something and just go, oh my goodness, this is incredible, and they just put their forks down.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if ever I have that experience, I'd like to order 7 more, please. I mean, there's you kind of lose sensitivity, and it's incredibly scary. Because this is where lust goes. What worked before doesn't work.
Yeah.
And we'll in a moment see there's a neurotransmitter issue that's going on. So there's actually a brain science thing that explains this. But Paul knew it, way before we knew brain science. That you lose the ability to feel things like you used to. So you lose the ability to enjoy it. And I've used this analogy before. I put it in one of my books where one of Hugh Hefner's girlfriends, said that Hugh, this was, a decade or 2 ago, that Hugh could no longer enjoy heterosexual intercourse. Because he had sort of hollowed himself out. And I thought, what irony. Right. Here's the paradigm example of the Playboy lifestyle, and he can't even enjoy the thing he's promoting.
Yeah.
Right? So that's what it looks like to have lost all sensitivity. That says, then Paul says, that leads to being given over to something called sensuality. And the Greek word he uses there, azelgia. All right, I'll stop pronouncing these. But it's the absence of restraint, and it's the insatiable desire for more. So the more you indulge, the more you want to indulge. So it's not just, so the first one is losing sensitivity is when it takes more to get the rush.
Yeah.
Right? Or it takes different or harder core, whatever. The second one is that the more you do it, the more you want it. So
right.
So these work in tandem.
Right.
So it's the idea, and the perfect picture for me comes from C.S. Lewis in the Chronicles of Narnia, where if you've seen the movie or you've read the books, there are these 4 British school children that find themselves in a magic land where animals talk. And there's this kind of white witch who is the kind of the enemy of the land of Narnia, keeping the land in perpetual winter. And the white witch befriends one of the kids, Edmund, and Edmund says he's hungry, and so she bewitches something called Turkish delight, these little candies, evidently that are very well known in other places. And she bewitches them so that the more he eats, the more he wants, and it spoils his appetite for anything else.
Yeah.
So it's happening on 2 levels. Number 1, it's all he's eating. So his appetite for food that nourishes him is gone. But eating the food doesn't satisfy his hunger. It only increases it. So for those of us who've been trapped in the web of this idea of sensuality, it's the more you do it, the more you need to do it. And the more you need to do it, the greater hit it takes, the wider array of experiences, or the deeper you have to go to get this hit, to get the hit. But then once you've done it, the feelings of shame and the guilt and the hardening of heart come, and the only thing that relieves those is more of the thing that you're eating. And as that's happening, your appetite for good things has been corrupted.
Right. Yep.
I mean, it's an unbelievable, devastatingly accurate picture.
Yeah.
Of what happens inside of us when we are literally given over. And this phrase, given over to sensuality, it's a phrase that Paul uses other places to describe the judgment of God. And the judgment of God, we'll talk about when we get to the whole hell conversation. The judgment of God isn't God sitting up in a computer zapping people. The judgment of God is built in to behaviors themselves. It's not that's not the only way the judgment of God's expressed, but one of the ways it's expressed is when God gives us over to things. So literally we say that sin is its own reward, sin is its own punishment. What that means is that the judgment of God isn't found, and this is such a key point, it's not found when you get caught, when she gets pregnant, when someone sees your browser tabs. That's not the judgment of God. That's the mercy of God stopping you, interrupting this road to ruin.
Right.
The judgment of God is found precisely in those moments when he doesn't intervene and he just lets us have what we want.
Yeah.
And so so Paul says that's given overness.
Yeah.
So I mean, to me, I just go, oh my goodness, even now, like in the pit of my stomach, I'm like, man, I know what that feels like. And then he just simply says, we're hungrier, we're lonelier, we're more ashamed after we indulge than before we did. And then it just leaves us full of greed. And the word he uses for greed means to just want more.
Yep.
It's literally the life then begins to be built around the satisfying of this. So it's I'm at work, I can't look at something, but I can't wait to get home and look at something. So I just think one of the reasons why I trust what's written in this book, even though it's sometimes so odd and hard to understand, is that there are insights and there's such wisdom there. And like, this is one of those times where I'm like, that's it. That's exactly what it's like.
Right. What's so fascinating to me is that without the understanding of neurological study at this time period, obviously thousands of years later, we're in a place where we can analyze all of that neurologically and scientifically. And there's so much study done on this where they see that the constant indulgence of this redesigns your brain that causes neural pathways.
Yeah, let's go to that.
The same way that heroin works in the brain.
Yes.
So that
it stimulates the same part of the brain that heroin does. So there's this reward center that's governed by dopamine, which is this neurotransmitter. So let me get to that.
Yeah.
Because not only does Paul, paint a picture, emerging science paints a picture of this. And so I want to read a couple of different studies to you. Number one, there were young adults split into two groups, a control group, and they were measured before and after on their attitudes towards things, and then a group that was exposed consistently to very hardcore stuff. And both groups were measured, on attitudes. And so here were some of the findings of this. Male subjects demonstrated increased callousness toward women, which, no duh. In at least the street porn I'm familiar with, the other person is simply there for you. There's no mutual satisfaction. There's no tenderness. There's no kindness. There's no covenant. There's nothing except just the act, the genital act. And that so reduces what sexuality is as it's presented in the scriptures, right? Yep. It's just sexuality is so much bigger than what you do with your genitals. Number two, subjects considered the crime of rape less serious. And we're seeing that in the rape culture on college campuses. When you immerse people in decades of this stuff, and then expect them to just abide by it's okay as long as it doesn't hurt anywhere else. That doesn't work. They've been formed to see women a certain kind of way. And so you have this massive rape culture happening that is the direct result of the deep formation of people around what women are to be seen as and used for. Subjects were obviously more accepting of non-marital sexual activity. They were more accepting of oral and anal sex, even if women did not find those things pleasant for them or comfortable for them. That was irrelevant. Obviously, they became more interested in extreme and more deviant forms of what they were seeing. They were more likely to be dissatisfied with their current partner. Of course, who can live up to and that's the thing.
John Mayer even said it. Like, he had a quote about 3 years ago that was like, in the world that we live in with as much porn as available, why would I ever get married?
Right.
Yeah.
Subjects were more accepting of sexual infidelity. They valued marriage less and were twice as likely to believe marriage may become obsolete. And then this one punched, and I know you have a little girl too. Men experienced a decreased desire for children, no duh. And women experienced a decreased desire to have a daughter.
Yeah.
And that one is just a kick in the stomach to me. My sweet Hannah Bear, 11 years old, just beginning the puberty, phase. And I can see why people wouldn't want one. If that's the view, I mean, think about how much educating I have to do for Hannah to live in this world. How much pepper spray, tasers. I have to teach her to watch out for roofies. I mean, are you kidding me? And we just are all like, hey, this isn't this big deal. Let's not be prudish.
Yeah.
Really, how many women are sexually assaulted? And I'm not some fundy sitting in a room somewhere just blaming news media. I'm just saying we're formed. You are being discipled and formed by something. We all are. As much as we think we're our own individuals, that is such a load of bunk. We are all in the process of being formed by something, and people formed by this come out a certain way.
Yeah.
And so you know, back to, I mean, to me, it just blows my mind. Then you've got the neuroscience part about what it does to your brain. And so this was, you know, it becomes addictive. It overstimulates the brain system that releases the pleasure neurotransmitter dopamine. It impairs memory and concentration. It numbs you to other pleasures of life. It causes sensitization. Because your reward system has been so hammered, you have an amped up attraction to images that like just walking by your computer monitor can, you know, just flare it up, or, you know, just seeing a quick glance of something. It diminishes impulse control and willpower. No duh. It literally shrinks your brain. Studies actually show that even moderate amounts of this can shrink gray matter in areas associated with cognitive function related to our ability to focus. It causes depression and low energy because it's interfering constantly with dopamine production. It causes erectile dysfunction because we become less aroused by normal human women. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. Every type of reward that has been studied increases the level of dopamine transmission in the brain. So stimulants like cocaine, meth act directly on the dopamine system. Dopamine surges when a person is exposed to novel stimuli, particularly if it's erotic, and when a stimuli is more arousing than anticipated. So we actually become addicted to the process of new. I have to find the new thing. It's unbelievable. So you know, and for those of us in the middle of the struggle, I mean, none of this is news. You know, very rarely do I come across somebody in my circles who's just totally okay. Yeah. Some say, hey, this is a normal part of a healthy sex life. This is a normal part of just managing your own sexuality. Okay. I disagree entirely, but you know, I'm not the moral police of the universe. But the folks I have conversations with are deeply concerned by the secondhand smoke of this in our culture. But not only that, how many people directly engage and what that does then to boyfriends and girlfriends and marriages and breakups and parents and all those sorts of things. Yeah. So the question becomes, for those of us interested, which is not everybody, but for those of us interested in clawing and scratching a way out, how does the reformation of desire work? Because that's what we're talking about. We're not just talking about managing behavior, because, you know, the last thing people need to be told is just to stop it. Stop it.
Yeah. Try to tell a heroin addict to just stop.
Just stop. We're built in a way, because we're not animals and because we're not angels, but we're a bit of both. We're built in a way that we're whole, and one part affects all parts. So to just stop it, okay, that's like telling someone who's depressed just to pray more. Yeah. It's like, okay, that's true, but it's a bit more complicated than just that. So I want to talk a little bit about steps to freedom, at least that I found helpful. And the first, of course, and this is the first of anything, is to begin to speak and to call this what it is. In biblical parlance, it's the act of confession, and confession doesn't mean, you know, what we do to a priest, but there is a deep picture in that there's somebody who we're in community with who actually knows what's going on in our hearts, and to find someone who is safe and someone who's not just going to sit there and say, yep, me too, but to find somebody who's wise in the ways of Jesus, for those of you who are Jesus followers, who is gracious and offers no condemnation, and yet will take this as seriously as it needs to be taken. I mean, that's a tough find. That's a very, very tough find. And so, I'm not just advocating you just spill this to anybody, but you're very discerning in who you spill it to, but it has to be spilled. Secrecy gives this much of its power.
Yeah.
To call it what it is.
Right.
So when I confess this before God and others, it's adultery in my heart.
Yeah.
It is not finding delight in the wife that God has given, but it is finding delight in other images.
Yeah.
And, to explain to my sweetie that there's nothing deficient about her, this is a deficiency in me, is very confusing to her.
Right.
You go ahead.
I was going to say at the very least, I mean, because to your point, trying to find a person that's like that kind of in this world, in this community that is kind of is beyond me too, but that can give that wise counsel. But at the same time, do you feel almost at the very least there's almost benefit in sitting in a confession in a Catholic church with the priest just so you could say it, just so it could come out? And
if that's all you got, yes. But please understand, the only thing I would disagree with is that the priest is somehow more holy than anybody else.
Yeah.
And that there's somehow God's a representative. I just think there's the sainthood of believers, the priesthood of believers. I just think that's true. But yes, if that
for the sake of confession, not to the acknowledgement that you're amongst holier.
And see, that's where SA groups or AA groups are unbelievably powerful.
There you go. Yep.
You run to confession. It's like people are all just going, yep, I know exactly what that's like. But there is this implicit, but we want to get better.
Yeah.
And but it begins with confession, right? So the joke is always, hey, my name's Mike, I'm an alcoholic.
Yeah.
Why do they make you say that? Why do they encourage you to say that? Well, because now you're telling the truth. To walk in truth is the hardest step. To go to your significant other or partner or spouse and to say, this is what I'm being formed by. And not just like 6 months ago, like yesterday. Yeah. That's a really courageous thing. And not just do it one time, but to walk in truth, is so hard. And to do it in a way where you're not guilted and shamed, and shut down and just told to stop it. That's such a hard find. So brothers and sisters, I wish I had more on that other than I can describe the kind of person you should look for. But in terms of where those people are in your life, obviously I got nothing. We pray, I pray for those kinds of people. Too bad God's not answered yet. So, so I'm just here with
God's
Andy.
just like, no, I want to, they just don't exist.
Right, exactly.
Oh, they're out there somewhere. Confession, the road to.
Yep. So that's huge. So the other thing, the second thing that really began to help me is the idea that I needed to unnumb from this. And the way I chose to unnumb was to try to push it as far away. So what I found is I learned that there were certain times I was more susceptible. Tired, coming out of a nap, coming off a spiritual high, believe it or not. I was always more lonely and depressed after those times. If my wife and I had not, for whatever reason, been intimate in a while, I found that I was more susceptible in those sorts of moments. And so what I began to do is to say, okay, what are the avenues in? So one obviously is the computer. And so to have, it's called Covenant Eyes, and I pay about $100 a year to have every website flagged and sent to a trusted friend. But then these smartphones came out, and now it's like, oh, this is actually more, this is actually easier, and I haven't found phone software yet.
Yeah, they're not designed in such. I think Android phones are a little bit better at this kind of thing. Apple's all compartmentalized per app, so it's not. There's no global systems that work great. There's in system preference in the settings. On iOS, you can apply a lot of different direct control filtering on the apps themselves, but not often within the app itself.
Right.
So yeah, it opened up a whole new world for young people and older people alike once smartphones hit the scene.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's different browsers you can download. Like you can disable Safari and then like download the X3 Church app and use that as a separate browser. I mean, there's some of, but you have to be very, you know, you got to be walking with someone intentionally, you know, like, and I think you even said like you took Safari off your phone. Like, I think you said Justy has the password, like, right. Like for certain stuff.
But here's the problem. I've learned that there's still ways I can find it.
Sure. Instagram, Pinterest,
right. So
every other
Twitter,
app. Yep.
Every other app. And so I'm actually toying with the idea. I just bought an iPhone 7. My wife got it for me for Christmas. And I'm just toying with the idea of, and the reason, the number one reason I want it is because I'm directionally illiterate. And to have a GPS at my tips, you have no idea. I have to go to the same place everywhere, or I have to go to the same place the same way. If I have to come from any other way, I have no idea how to go. I've lived in Orange County now 20 years, and I have no clue how to get to stuff. Hey, is this 91 east or west, and which way should I go? And I just am not there.
I love that.
So literally the thought of not having a GPS like handy scares me, but that's literally the only reason I haven't just gone to a brick, that you just flip open and you can text on, and that's it.
Yeah. We just need to buy you a Garmin for your car. Use one of the old school GPS systems, TomTom, Garmin, one of those.
Do they still work?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they're still great.
Are they really?
Yeah, they're still good.
I kind of don't believe it.
I know. Well, it's just a phone. If you ride subways, if you walk places, I mean, that's the multi-feature benefit of a phone. But if it's always a situation in your car, I mean, then you could just use, one of those systems. I mean, it's just like the system's built in.
All right.
Those are fine.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
My millennial technological spiel.
Yes. Well done. And so I began to try to push away this as far away. So if I was going to do it, I had to work, and that working increased the risks of getting caught.
Yeah.
And I didn't do it out of guilt. I didn't do it out of fear. But I did it out of a deep desire to be unnumb. Mm-hmm. And so I found that as I unnumbed, and it's kind of like dieting for me. It's not just enough to not eat bad food, but it's to begin to desire good food. Mm-hmm. And so you have to unnumb your palate almost. I have to fast from all of that sugary stuff that I love, so that fruit tastes very sweet, right? It's that same thing, man. And so it's not just enough to push it away, but I had to begin to engage in formational practices that began to have the opposite effect.
Yeah.
So this for me was huge, and I'd never heard this until I discovered guys like Dallas Willard and Richard Foster, and guys that really talked about spiritual disciplines, the practices of opening yourself up to grace so that grace can change you in ways that you cannot change by direct effort. And so, the idea of fasting, taking a meal and using the time I would eat to pray, the idea of taking long walks, the idea of journaling, those things, beginning to read the Bible throughout, trying to read the Bible in a year. I mean, deep friendships, pursuing my wife, just romantically more. I mean, they were counter to the formation that had pushed me in the opposite direction. So it wasn't enough. Paul has this great line. He says to people who've been stealing, steal no longer, but work with your hands so that you might give to the poor. And I love that. I love that as a piece of advice. It's like, how do we steal? We steal with our hands. So do something with your hands, work,
right,
and do it for something bigger than you.
And I know this is all. I love that verse, because it's so anti-consumerism at the same time. To be like, stop consuming, but rather create. It's just, anyways,
create and share. Yeah. There's the millennial. There you go. Everything has to have a cause.
Yeah. #collab.
So for me, there was the beginning to walk in truth. Then there was the pushing away and the shutting of doors. Then there was the practicing in community of formational practices that began to form me differently. Now, again, you can do all of this checklist, and if you view it as a checklist and a formula that's going to solve the problem, you're going to miss it entirely. These are not things that solve the problem. These are things that open you up so that the problem can be solved. And to me, that's a big world of difference. I don't want to just settle for having around through sheer willpower, saying, no, I want to be the kind of person who yearns for what's good.
Yeah.
And that's a whole different conversation.
Totally.
And so that becomes lifestyle stuff, right? It's diet. It's the same thing as diet, man. I mean, literally, I'm learning this as I try to get in some way, shape, or form in decent shape. It's not just enough to say no to food. It's to say yes to the right food. It's to learn to love to eat again. It's to learn to practice formational practices around. So it's avoiding certain restaurants and triggers. Jesse can't bring ice cream in the house because I will just eat it. I just will eat ice cream. But if we have like macaroons, they're safe. Lima beans, safe.
Lima beans.
No, Brussels sprouts, no problem. But it's also then beginning to use my body for something other than just consuming calories, right? It's the working out part. I mean, so I know how this sounds, and it can sound just a legalistic, like here's an accountability checklist. That's not in any way, shape, or form what needs to happen. You don't need to be told to stop. Right. What needs to happen is that your desires need to begin to change. And as your desires change, the saying no becomes the natural extension of who you're becoming.
Yep.
And that's the deep part of Paul's teaching that we don't talk a lot about. All of this advice is given in the context of people who are already new creations.
Right.
And then he keeps saying, live up to what's already true of you.
Yeah.
And so it's not that, hey, do this to become free. It's that, no, actually you're free. Now live up to your freedom. Now claim your freedom. You've got an inheritance. Now claim it. You are already called, and you no longer sit under condemnation. So claim that inheritance. And that's a whole different thing. So it's the example I always use, it's becoming who you already are. So another example, when I first got married, I was formed as a single man at the age of 29. And part of the habits of my single manness included, laundry piles on the floor, dishes that would soak for weeks, bedding that was never washed, or made, and so all of a sudden, I meet this beautiful woman. We decide we're going to get married. I show up at a church. It's just a Sunday, in a long parade of Sundays. It's at 7:00. At 7:45, he pronounces us husband and wife. I walk out of a church and I have an entirely new identity, but am I formed around that identity? Nope, not at all. Not at all. I have no idea how to be a husband. None. And so what begins to happen is I'm invited to become what's already true. So we begin the hard work of meshing two sinful kingdoms, right? My kingdom and her kingdom, together to form one flesh. And we're battering up against each other on our preferences, whose preference wins when it comes to toothpaste and laundry and dishes and the air conditioning and all of those sorts of things. You're negotiating all of this stuff. And what began to happen is I didn't leave my laundry on the floor. And I began to realize dishes could be reused, and that bedding really should be washed. And there were things like duvet covers. Now, I didn't do that in order to become a husband. I did that because I already was one, and I was so desiring to have a good marriage that I was willing to be formed by somebody else than myself. And my desires, because it was just easy for me to have laundry on the floor and never do dishes. Right. But because I was in covenant relationship with her, and because there was enough beauty and goodness around, even though we were negotiating and fighting and arguing, I began to put off those ways of thinking and acting and living and breathing that were fitting for a single person, but weren't fitting for a married person. And I was putting on the habits and practices of somebody that was married. Right? Same thing happens when you have a kid. Yeah. Here's a kid. One day you're a couple, the next day you're a family. Do I have any idea how to be a father? I do not. But it's the process of now realizing, we can't just do anything at the drop of a hat. It takes us 20 minutes to pack a diaper bag before we go anywhere. oh, we shouldn't fly for the next like 18 years because flying with a kid is the worst. Right? I mean, there's this whole other thing that goes on in terms of like being formed by something you already are. Mm-hmm. So that's the difference for me. You have, if you're a follower of Jesus, you have a mentor in Christ, his spirit in you, a community around you. You have instruments of grace, confession and repentance and baptism and communion and the community worship and the scriptures that open you up to the grace of God so that you begin to hunger for things that are healthy, good, and right.
Yeah.
Now, there was a study done, and I thought this was absolutely brilliant. Let me try to find it. I've got like 22 pages of notes. Oh, dang. I don't know where it is. It was a study that was done that compared people that were successful in overcoming this versus people who were not successful in overcoming this. And they found there were 4 sort of pictures or 4 practices or 4 things that were true of the people who had kind of overcome versus the people who had not overcome. And because the big thing is healing from this does not come from trying harder or feeling more shame. You've already done that, right? The healing does not come from slavishly obeying some checklist that says, if you just do A, B, C, and D, you're going to be okay. It doesn't come that way, right? The sensitivity, the sensuality, lust doesn't operate on a flat line. It always wants more. Mm-hmm. And so there were oh, dang it, I'm still looking for it. There was this set of 4 things. Oh, here we go. All right. There are 4 major factors. Thank you, Andy, for nothing.
Glad I could help out there.
That predict success and recovery. First, the individual must be personally motivated to be free of their addiction and possess a willingness to do whatever it takes. So, so somebody will come up to me and say, hey, I'm addicted to porn. I'm like, okay, how does it get to you? On my computer. Okay, where's your computer? Next to my bed. Okay, you willing to not have it next to your bed? No, I kind of like it next to my bed. Okay, well, guess what? You're going to keep struggling, right? I mean, at some point, they call it rock bottom. At some point, you're willing to do whatever.
Yeah.
And so whether that's restrict your freedom on the internet, whether that's show up at an SA support group meeting. I've got a dear friend who the most humbling thing he's ever done was walk into one of those meetings and identify with that crew. Mm-hmm. Very young guy. And, but it was a huge step for him because it was indicated his willingness to do anything.
Yeah.
Secondly, it's necessary to create a safe environment which drastically reduces access to porn and other triggers, right? So that for me was pushing things away. Mm-hmm. Third, this person should affiliate with a 12-step support group. Now, I don't know that every person needs that. It certainly will never hurt anybody. But when I talk about confession, that's what I'm talking about. A place where you literally can just be your ugly old self. And then lastly, and again, this is from a purely sort of secular, non-religious perspective. Mm-hmm. The individual needs to select a counselor or therapist who has special training. But see, I would add some things to that list. I would also add, we have to recapture a picture of the beauty of sexuality. Mm-hmm. We have to resist the assumptions that fuel the pornographic industry about what women are like or what women are. And again, I'm speaking heterosexually from man to woman. I realize there are other dynamics, other directions. But there's a sense that, when I had a daughter and realized these are daughters, what are the dads thinking here? Or this is an image bearer. Mm-hmm. And what we're celebrating is the tarnishing of the image bearing of the people you're watching. And as you're doing it, it's killing your image bearing too. Mm-hmm. We're becoming less human in doing this. Realizing that for me, confession isn't just, hey, God, I agree that this behavior was wrong, but it's the confession of desire, that I hunger for this. And that Paul uses this great image about grieving the Holy Spirit. And a mentor of mine named John Coe just said, he calls it sitting in the weeds. He's like, when you go before God, don't fix it. Don't just slap like a confession on it. Just sit there in the weeds of your own darkness and scumminess and ask the Spirit of God, how are you grieved by this?
Yeah.
And that was like a whole different scary thing than just, yep, God, you're right.
Yeah.
And so again, man, I don't know if this is helpful. I'm so worried about trying to avoid the classic sort of purity culture, sort of shallow phrases and things. But these have been things that have been helpful, legitimately helpful to me in the journey. I went through therapy. It wasn't about this, but it affected this. As I just began to get healthy in other ways, emotionally, and I realized, I have this whole emotional thing that this is what I do to numb, when I want to numb out. This is, and so I know this sounds ridiculous, but I actually got into video gaming culture. I play this wonderful game named Destiny, and I play it, I don't know, 3 or 4 times a week, and I absolutely love it. And it's something else I do with my hands. It's like that other thing.
When you create. I mean, it's like it's causal.
But I numb out.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sure.
I can escape my head for a while.
Yeah.
Without doing anything that's sinful.
Yeah.
Right. And so I have other ways of doing this too that are healthy.
Like reading one of the many thousands of books
right?
on this
Love
shelf.
Love that. Kids help, man. Sure. Oh my goodness, to have Nate.
Yeah.
Nate and I walking through this together, just saying, hey, how are your eyes today? And that's amazing.
Right.
To get to live. Sorry. To try to get to live how I would have wanted my journey to have gone. Now through him, and to give him opportunity to have a much better picture is so inspiring to me. That has been an unexpected source of a great motivation and joy to be, with him in that. And so, the struggle continues, but there's so much more joy and less despair in it, because I've seen the victories, and I have a radar now that's more finely attuned to when I'm spiraling, and a willingness more to ask for help, and certainly, man, this isn't a straight line of perfection. That's the last thing. It's like another analogy, but these are so important. I hope you're still listening. Friends of ours had adopted some children, particularly a boy in this instance, out of the foster care system. And I've told this story 1,000 times, but it still is one of the most powerful pictures of the process of becoming who you are. And little did the parents know that this particular boy, one of the ways this boy had been abused by his biological family, was that he was punished by being locked in his room without food for a weekend. He would be allowed to use the bathroom and allowed water, but he would be not allowed to eat from Friday night until Saturday or till Monday morning. Have you not heard me tell the story?
No, I haven't heard you tell the story.
But kids are smart and kids are resilient, and so this particular kid started to hide food. During the week, you'd hide food up in your room, and of course. And so the kid gets pulled out of that home, put into foster care, and then put into the home of some friends of ours. And what's the kid do? Well, the kid can be told, "Hey, you're part of a new family, and we're going to be great," and But what's the kid going to do?
He's going to hide food.
The kid's going to hide food.
Yeah.
And suppose you were. And you listening, suppose you were a parent of this child, and you realized why the kid was hiding food. would you be angry at the kid for hiding food? Yeah. See, I don't think you would be. I think you'd be grieved, which is why I think Paul uses such an interesting word when he says our sin grieves the Spirit of God. You wouldn't be angry. You'd be angry at the parents, who did this. You wouldn't be angry at the kid. And what you would say, most likely, to this kid is that you would say, listen, we will never, ever do this to you. You will never starve here. We will never punish you that way. You're part of our family now. We will never do this to you. Now, if you're that kid, do you believe that? Nope. You still hide food. And if you're the parents, you let the kid hide food. The question is, how many hundreds, if not thousands of meals have to go by before that kid stops hiding food?
Yeah.
How many times does that kid have to be told he's loved and part of that new family before he dares to believe it's true? And so, my brothers and my sisters, the process of growing into a new identity is not at all a straight line. It's just like this kid. It's so easy to hide food, to have these things that numb us out, to have these things that we think are innocuous, but are actually causing us to be less than fully human. And I don't think God's up there angry, ready to smite. I think God's mercy interrupts those things and gives us chances to turn and to reorient towards health. I think there are times when God allows us to be given over, for sure, out of deep grief. But I think the far better picture is of an adopted kid into a new family. It's just going to take a lot of meals, a lot of healthy meals, to realize I don't have to hide food anymore. And so the goal is never perfection; it's just progress. Is our heart more alive and more full of feeling than it was 6 months ago? I used to keep track of how often I would do this, and my goal would, obviously be to decrease frequency. And I'm just kind of weird that way. And that worked for a while.
Pretty sure a lot of guys do the same thing.
Yeah. And it worked for a while, but that didn't change the desires, and that's what I learned. That was the thing I was after.
Yeah.
Was that I would become unnumb and fully alive. And so, what were you going to say before I start signing off?
Oh, okay. There's so many other questions that come to mind. Things I would even want to hear more about from you, like just what's the journey been with Justina, along with all this kind of going on. Like, I'd be curious to hear her voice and being a wife and having this on the other side. How many wives are out there hearing this and they're just like, I just don't know what to do. How do I hold it? Because I'm not the one struggling. My husband struggles. So how do I,
right,
kind of walk with him in this process? What does that reconciliation look like? That word to me, I like, in regards like my personal journey with this, the thing that hangs over my head is just the relationships that have fallen apart and how they've fallen apart and the pendulum swing of this process, because the history of the church coming into this and trying to create programs in which like you put purity up on a pedestal, that doesn't bring you through this course of sexual reconciliation that we're talking about. And it was that one of my former relationships that was an incredibly important relationship for me, I was on this pendulum of like purity and trying to like hold that line and being like, oh, I'm doing so much better and I don't want to like fall apart like in this thing. But it was actually the very thing that broke our relationship, was becoming this very coarse and rigid Christian about holding that and completely shaming the whole sexuality in trying to hold purity. Like that became almost a church culture byproduct, of that. And it was like because
purity focuses just on your genitals too.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's like, not all, no, and I'm not bashing the purity movements. I just think that as you're saying, they can be Band-Aids and not deep transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of, that's been, even then coming into marriage, it's just, I've been challenged in ways in that same way, because in my mind, it's just kind of like the whole church culture narrative of sexuality has never been promoted. It's always been demoted.
Right.
And so it's like, for what it's worth, I mean, there aren't many pastors that talk well about this, that help us to see sexuality in this wonderful thing that God has given us, and then how that plays itself out wonderfully and beautifully in marriage, especially for a lot of guys in my generation where we kickstarted the internet, and we were like the first exposed. You're welcome for that. And it's like we're the first exposed now, where we're just like, whoa, oh my gosh, like how we're in this crisis of like, how do we really practice wonderful, healthy sexuality while walking with this, struggle, that's there.
That's right.
That's, it's like the shame part in my mind so much isn't the ongoing walk with it. It's living in those former relationships that I feel so like, and it's like, and I feel like I can't get back to asking for forgiveness for those, it's like, I feel trapped in,
that's right.
Those are on my mark and chart sheet for like all of like what that thing has done to my life.
Right.
And, I mean, absolutely, for me, the most compelling thing along the way is my kids and my children and my son, and thinking about now, not only is good fatherhood everything I want it to be, now it's like, okay, this is a part of myself and history. I don't want that for him. And it's just, you and I are so much significantly more informed because of this whole journey than my dad ever was.
Of course.
And
our
like,
parents weren't prepared for this.
No way. And it was funny. I mean, I went to like friends' houses as a kid, like in high school, and like some of these dads, like, had posters all up over their garage and all this kind of stuff. And I'm just like, I don't think my parents realized like my friend's dad is like, it just was.
Yeah.
There's plenty of those circumstances, and it's terrible in a way. I mean, porn finds you, that seems so much more accurate. I mean, that's how it found me. I was walking home with my friend from lunch one day when I was like 12, and it was just like this grimy, gross newspaper type of thing that we found.
Yep.
And it just ate away.
Yep. Yep.
So
dang.
Yeah.
Dang. All right. Well, I'm tired.
Yeah.
I always feel super vulnerable about this stuff, and I'm not gonna respond to comments. I actually had this thrown in my face when I was criticizing Trump about his comments about when he was that Billy Price interview or Billy Bean interview or whatever the guy's name is, and I was critical of that, and somebody's like, well, if we put your browsing history up in the world, how awesome would you look? And I'm like, okay. Well, I didn't realize I forfeited any moral authority because I've struggled with this in the past. But so I've just realized, not everyone's kosher with this, so I'm not going to pay attention. But we really do hope, to some degree or another, this is helpful. Our goal, as always, is to talk about anything. That's our tagline. Our tagline for a church is safe to belong. Our tagline for a podcast is to talk about anything, because we believe the church should be the place where you can talk about anything. So, my brothers and my sisters, obviously so much more to say. One of the great pieces of the neuroscience good news is that your brain can be rewired. The pathways that you've established can be undone, and healthy ones can be reestablished. And so there's this really interesting science now that undergirds spiritual formation that's fascinating.
Oh, Christian Scientology.
False. False. No, I just prefer Scientology. So anyway, my brothers and sisters, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord, I'm so thrown off. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord shine his face upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance to you, and may he give you peace. Thank you for your support. We love you. Bless you. Bye.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Vox Podcast. Learn more about us at voxpodcast.com. Follow us on Twitter at the Vox Podcast, and now support us on Patreon at patreon.com/VoxPodcast.